In the winter shadows of 1431, in the fortified city of Siasora, Transylvania, a child was born whose name would one day strike fear across Europe. Vlad, son of Vlad II. His father, a proud knight of the Order of the Dragon, had sworn loyalty to defend Christendom against the Ottoman threat. That oath earned him both honor and enemies, as the dragon's sigil became a symbol of both piety and tyranny. Vlad's lineage was steeped in blood and ambition, a dynasty caught between empires and betrayal. His mother, a noble woman, raised him in a world of intrigue, war, and whispers of ancient power. The young Vlad learned early that survival in Wallachia meant mastering both cruelty and cunning. The land itself was torn by political rivalries, foreign influence, and treacherous nobles. As a child, he watched executions, beheadings, and impalements, acts meant to enforce loyalty and fear. Those images carved themselves into his young mind like scars that would never heal. When he was only 11, his father sent him and his younger brother Radu to the Ottoman court as political hostages. It was a diplomatic gesture, a promise that Vlad II would remain loyal to the Sultan. But in truth, it was a prison wrapped in gold and silk. The Ottoman Empire treated the boys as pawns, testing their loyalty through cruelty and manipulation. Vlad watched as disobedient captives were beaten, tortured, or executed before his eyes. He learned languages, strategy, and the art of fear, not from tutors, but from tormentors. The Sultan's men trained him in combat, horsemanship, and psychological warfare. He grew quiet, observant, studying the ways men broke and how some never did. His brother Radu, charming and beautiful, adapted easily, earning the favor of the Ottoman court. Vlad, however, grew cold and resentful, refusing to bow fully. That defiance earned him both punishment and admiration. He began to understand the essence of power. It came not from mercy, but from control. In those dark years, the seeds of Vlad the Impaler were sown. When news came that his father and older brother were betrayed and murdered back in Wallachia, something within him snapped. His father had been killed by his own boyars, the very nobles he trusted. His brother Mircea was buried alive. Rage replaced innocence. Vlad swore vengeance, not only against his enemies, but against betrayal itself. Upon his release, he returned to a homeland that no longer recognized him. Wallachia was a land of shifting loyalties, its throne a game of death. Vlad's claim to power was challenged by pretenders, supported by both Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. But Vlad was no longer the frightened boy they once knew. He had become something darker, a calculating, ruthless strategist. When he first seized the throne in 1448, it was he lacked support, and his enemies closed in fast. Forced into exile, Vlad wandered through Moldavia and Transylvania, sharpening his hatred and ambition. Every betrayal only fueled his obsession with reclaiming what was his. In exile, he built alliances, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. He cultivated a reputation, not of mercy, but of vengeance. In time, whispers spread of a prince returned from the dead, more beast than man. When his opportunity came in 1456, he took it with unrelenting fury. Vlad rode into Wallachia with an army of hardened men and a heart devoid of forgiveness. The boyars who had betrayed his father welcomed him, thinking they could control him. They were wrong. Vlad invited them to a grand feast at Targovict under the guise of reconciliation. The night began with laughter and ended with screams. As dawn rose, hundreds of noblemen and their families were impaled outside the city walls. Their bodies swayed in the morning breeze like macabre decorations. This was his message. Betrayal would always be repaid in blood. The impalement forest became his symbol, his signature, his throne of terror. To his enemies, it was madness. To Vlad, it was justice. He believed that fear was the truest form of governance. Under his reign, crime nearly vanished, not from morality, but from terror. Thieves, murderers, and liars were impaled publicly, their corpses left for days as warnings. The land grew quiet, disciplined, obedient. Even foreign merchants reported that a golden cup could sit on a fountain's edge without being stolen. His methods were gruesome, but they worked. Yet behind this order lay a growing darkness. Vlad began to see mercy as weakness and suspicion as wisdom. He ruled with iron cruelty, trusting no one, fearing only betrayal. When the Ottoman Sultan demanded tribute, Vlad refused. It was an act of rebellion that would ignite a war. In 1461, Vlad launched a brutal campaign across the Danube. His troops burned villagers, slaughtered soldiers, and left impaled corpses as warnings to the Sultan's armies. Reports claimed over 20,000 impaled victims: soldiers, peasants, men, women, and children. The Ottomans called him Kasikak Bey, the Impaler Prince, to the Christian world. He became both hero and monster. Tales of his cruelty spread faster than any army. Chroniclers wrote of rivers running red with blood and forests filled with corpses. His enemies trembled at his name, and even allies feared his temper. But behind his terror, there was purpose to protect his land from invasion and treachery. He saw himself as divine justice incarnate. When he confronted spies and traitors, his punishments became theatrical. Some were boiled alive, others skinned, and others impaled from mouth to spine. Each act designed to send a message louder than words. He once reportedly dined among the impaled, calmly eating bread and meat while corpses twitched on stakes around him. To him, it was not horror, it was order. His mind had fused power with pain. And through that darkness, legends were born. Travelers returning from Wallachia spoke of a prince who drank blood and could not die. The name Dracula, son of the dragon, began to twist into Dracula, son of the devil. Myths blurred with truth until none could tell them apart. The chronicles of Saxon merchants painted him as a monster, a demon among men. But to his people, he was still the protector who saved them from chaos. Fear, after all, brought safety. And in the silence of terror, the land thrived. Vlad's rule became a paradox: horror and order intertwine. Yet every empire of fear eventually cracks from within. Enemies gathered in the shadows once again, plotting his downfall. Vlad sensed the shifting winds, but this time he would face not only armies, but ghosts of his own making. The Impaler's legend was only beginning. The year was 1462. The fires of war crackled across Wallachia as the Sultan's banners rose on the horizon. Vlad knew this day would come. His defiance of the tribute was a declaration of war. Yet, unlike other princes, he did not fear the Sultan's might. He embraced it. He saw the coming invasion not as a doom, but as destiny, a chance to carve his name into eternity. The Ottoman army that advanced toward him numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Among them were janissaries, cavalry, and siege engines, an overwhelming force. But Vlad's strength lay not in numbers, but in terror. As the Ottoman soldiers marched deeper into Wallachia, they found villages burned to the ground, wells poisoned, crops destroyed, livestock slaughtered, scorched earth. Vlad had ordered everything of value stripped or burned so that no invader could use it. It was a ruthless strategy, one born of both genius and madness. The Ottoman scouts began to vanish in the forests, leaving only bloodied armor and whispers behind. In the dead of night, Vlad's small forces struck like shadows. They killed silently, vanishing before dawn, leaving only mutilated corpses to tell their tale. Fear spread like wildfire through the Sultan's ranks. The soldiers began to believe they were fighting not men, but demons. And in many ways, they were men molded by Vlad's merciless rule, fanatical and unafraid of death. The forests of Wallachia became a labyrinth of nightmares. The smell of decay hung in the air. Wolves howled as if mourning the souls of the dead. And then the Sultan reached the outskirts of Targovic. What awaited him there would become one of the most terrifying scenes in medieval history. As the Ottoman vanguard approached the city, they saw something that made even hardened soldiers falter. Before them stretched a vast field, not of crops or grass, but of stakes. Tens of thousands of wooden stakes, each crowned with a rotting body. Men, women, children, soldiers, all impaled in various stages of decay. It was a forest of death stretching for miles, swaying gently in the wind. The Sultan himself was said to have recoiled at the sight. This was Vlad's message! Welcome to my kingdom! Chroniclers would later claim that over 20,000 corpses were impaled that day. The Sultan's army hesitated, their spirits broken before a single battle was fought. Even the horses refused to advance through the grotesque spectacle, and in the shadows beyond, Vlad's forces watched. He had crafted this horror not for cruelty's sake alone, but as psychological warfare. Every stake, every corpse, was a weapon of terror, sharper than any sword. He wanted the enemy to feel his presence, even when unseen. That night, as the Ottoman camp settled uneasily, Vlad struck again. He led a surprise attack, a night raid so fierce it became legend. Dressed in black, his men moved like phantoms. They infiltrated the Ottoman camp, setting fires and slitting throats. The chaos was total. Tents burned, men screamed, and confusion reigned. The Sultan barely escaped with his life. By dawn, thousands of Ottoman soldiers lay dead, their blood soaking the earth. The survivors were left trembling, haunted by shadows. Vlad's attack was not just a military maneuver, it was a psychological masterpiece. He wanted them to believe he could strike anywhere, anytime. To the superstitious, it seemed he truly was the devil's son. The campaign faltered. The Sultan eventually withdrew, unable to sustain the invasion. Against all odds, Vlad had done the impossible. He had repelled the might of the Ottoman Empire. For a brief, shining moment, he was hailed as a hero of Christendom. The Pope and European kings praised him as the defender of the faith. Letters from Rome described him as a valiant crusader against the infidels. But in the same breath, rumors of his cruelty spread just as quickly. Merchants returning from Wallachia told tales of impalements, torture, and rivers of blood. Stories twisted into nightmares of Vlad drinking the blood of his victims or feasting beside their corpses. Whether true or exaggerated, it didn't matter. The legend of Dracula was being born. And legends, once born, cannot be killed. Meanwhile, in Wallachia, peace proved fleeting. The same Bojars who once betrayed his father now whispered against him again. They plotted with Hungary, seeking to replace him with a more obedient ruler. Vlad's paranoia deepened. He saw betrayal in every shadow, treachery in every smile. His punishments grew even more severe. Entire villages were wiped out for suspicion of disloyalty. The impalements became not just punishment, but theater. Each new display was grander, crueler, and more symbolic. To Vlad, fear was the only truth. Men understood, he once said. When men fear you, you need not fear them. That philosophy defined his rule. But fear, like a fire, consumes even its master. As his cruelty escalated, so did the hatred around him. His enemies, both foreign and domestic, began to unite. The Hungarian king, Marciasa Kodabinasa, saw opportunity in the chaos. He spread false letters suggesting that Vlad was conspiring with the Ottomans. The deception worked. The same Europe that once praised Vlad now branded him a traitor. In 1462, he was captured by Hungarian forces. There, he was paraded as a monster, the Impaler Prince. Pamphlets and drawings circulated across Europe depicting him as a sadistic fiend. His enemies relished every word, every exaggerated horror. But even in chains, Vlad refused to break. He spent over a decade imprisoned, his legend growing darker with every retelling. In his absence, Wallachia descended into chaos, awaiting the monster's inevitable return. The world believed Vlad the Impaler was finished, a broken relic of blood and madness rotting in a Hungarian dungeon. For 12 long years, his name was whispered only as a curse, his deeds passed down as warnings to children. But legends never die. They merely wait in silence until the world fears them again. While imprisoned, Vlad watched kingdoms rise and crumble, their kings weaker and more corrupt than ever. He wrote letters from captivity, always proclaiming his innocence, always reminding his captors of his one true enemy, the Ottomans. His iron will never faltered. He plotted, learned, and waited for the right moment to strike once more. Even in his cell, he inspired fear. Guards swore that his piercing eyes glowed in the darkness. Rumors spread that he could summon bats or vanish at will, that he was more superior than man. It didn't matter whether it was true. In the minds of men, fear had already given him immortality. Years passed, and Europe's political tides began to shift again. The Ottoman threat grew stronger, pressing into the Balkans, consuming kingdoms one by one. Hungary found itself desperate for leaders, ruthless enough to stand against the Sultan's armies. And so, In a bitter twist of irony, the very men who imprisoned Vlad now needed him. In 1475, Vlad was released under the condition that he would once again fight for Christendom. He emerged from his cell, pale and gaunt, but his eyes burned with the same cold fire as before. The dragon had returned from its cave. He rode south toward Wallachia, gathering old allies and mercenaries. Many who had once feared him now rallied under his banner, not from love, but from awe. The peasants remembered that under Vlad's terror there was at least order. They said, "Better the devil we know than the chaos we have?" That sentiment was enough to make his army grow. When he crossed into Wallachia, the land was broken. Bandits ruled the countryside. Nobles bickered, and the Ottomans had taken hold of the throne. His younger brother Radu, once his rival and the Sultan's ally, now ruled in his stead. But Radu was no longer the bright prince of their youth. He had grown weak, consumed by indulgence and disease. When word reached him that Vlad had returned, he reportedly trembled with both fear and guilt. The brothers were destined to meet again, one born of fire, the other of shadow. Their confrontation was inevitable. As Vlad advanced, Radu's forces faltered. The once loyal nobles switched sides, knowing that resistance meant death. When Radu died, suddenly some say of illness, others whisper by Vlad's secret hand, the path to the throne was open. In 1476, Vlad the Impaler became voivode of Wallachia once more. The land, soaked in the blood of its past, now braced for the return of its cruel savior. But the world had changed, and so had he. His years in captivity had stripped away whatever fragments of humanity he had left. He ruled again with the same unflinching cruelty, as if determined to remind the world why it had feared him. His first decree was to execute anyone who had collaborated with the Ottomans. Thousands were rounded up and impaled. The forests outside Targovik once again bloomed with stakes. Travelers spoke of the stench of death hanging over the valleys 4 miles. Roads were safe. Merchants traveled freely, and order was restored through terror. It was a fragile peace, built on the screams of the condemned. Vlad's new enemies were not just foreign invaders, but ghosts, the weight of his own legend, pressing upon him. Everywhere he went, he was met, not with loyalty, but with silent dread. The same fear that had preserved his power now isolated him completely. He trusted no one. Even his soldiers whispered that their lord was not human, but cursed. Yet, when the Ottoman threat rose again that winter, Vlad did what he always did. He faced it head on. The Sultan sent a massive army across the Danube to crush Wallachia once and for all. Vlad rode out to meet them with only a fraction of their strength. But for him, numbers never mattered, only resolve. His tactics were brutal and brilliant. Ambushes, scorched earths, psychological warfare. He left impaled bodies in the enemy's path to demoralize them before they even reached battle. The Ottoman commander reportedly found stakes arranged in the shape of a dragon, as if to declare, "The son of the dragon still rules here." Despite being outnumbered, Vlad's forces inflicted devastating losses. But victory came at a cost. His own allies were growing restless. The nobles who had supported his return now feared his wrath. They whispered again, plotting in the dark as they once had against his father. Betrayal had always been Wallachia's true disease, and this time it would consume them all. In late 1476, Vlad's army was ambushed near the capital. Accounts varied. Some say it was the Ottomans, others say his own Bojars betrayed him. Either way, the dragon met his final battle surrounded by enemies. He fought like the warrior. He was fire smashless, unstoppable. Chronicles claim he cut down dozens before being overwhelmed. When the dust settled, the Prince of Terror was dead. His body, they say, was found headless on the battlefield. His severed head was sent to the Sultan as proof that the Impaler was no more. It was displayed on a stake in Constantinople, the final irony of his reign. Yet, even in death, his legend refused to fade. Stories spread that he did not truly die, that he rose from his grave at night to seek vengeance. Peasants spoke of his ghosts wandering the forests, his armor stained with eternal blood. Others believed he had become something beyond mortal, a creature feeding on fear and life itself. Centuries later, his name would inspire one of literature's most enduring monsters, Count Dracula. But the truth behind the myth was far more terrifying. Vlad the Impaler was no supernatural being. He was human, and that made his cruelty real. He proved how absolute power, born from trauma and vengeance, could twist a man into something monstrous. To his people, he remained both savior and nightmare, the ruler who protected them by terrorizing the world. To his enemies, he was the devil of the East, the impaler whose forests of corpses haunted memory. Even the chronicles that condemned him could not deny his strength and genius, for in the brutal chessboard of medieval Europe, he had been both king and executioner. His enemies perished, his allies betrayed him, but his name endured. And though centuries passed, his story lived on half-truth, half-nightmare. From the ashes of Wallachia rose the legend of Dracula, eternal and feared. Some called him hero, others monster, but all remembered him. In every drop of ink that told his tale, the shadow of the impaler remained. His cruelty became myth, his fear became immortality, and his blood, if the legends were true, never truly dried. The man was gone, but the legend had just begun. For as long as men fear the dark, the name Vlad Dracula will never die. As the winter of 1461 set in, Wallachia was blanketed by snow, but the peace was deceptive. For Vlad's enemies were gathering in the shadows. The Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, had once been his ally, but now he turned his gaze toward Vlad with suspicion and political opportunism. Reports many forged recommended that Vlad had betrayed Christendom and allied with the Ottomans. These false letters, allegedly written by Vlad himself, painted him as a traitor. King Matthias used them as justification to withdraw support and arrest Vlad in 1462. Vlad, betrayed and surrounded by deceit, was captured during what was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting. They transported him to Buda, Hungary, under heavy guard, his wrists bound in iron chains that bit into his flesh. The man who once inspired terror in his enemies now sat imprisoned in a cold, dark cell. Yet even in captivity, his legend continued to grow across Europe. The tales of his cruel terrible or exaggerated spread through German pamphlets like wildfire. Dracula, the son of the devil, they called him, a man who impaled thousands and drank the blood of his enemies. These pamphlets were among the first printed horror tales in history. Some claimed he had dined among forests of corpses, calmly eating his meal as men and women writhed on stakes. Whether true or not, the myth of Vlad outgrew the man himself. In the dungeons of Hungary, Vlad brooded on his betrayal, biding his time. Years passed. The world outside changed, but his hatred did not. In 1475, as the Ottoman Empire pressed harder into Europe, Matthias saw usefulness in his former prisoner. Vlad was released, reinstated as a Christian defender, and once again granted troops to fight against the Turks. He was older now, wearied by years of captivity, yet his resolve burned stronger than ever. When he returned to Wallachia, he found a land fractured by fear and divided loyalties. His younger brother Radu, the same one who had once been his hostage companion, now ruled under Ottoman influence. To Vlad, Radu's alliance with the Turks was treachery beyond forgiveness. Their confrontation became a brutal civil war drenched in blood and vengeance. Villages were burned, men impaled, and brothers turned against brothers. Vlad's cruelty resurfaced with renewed fervor, as if fueled by the years he had lost in chains. Some chroniclers wrote that he impaled thousands in a single day to send a message of absolute dominance. Others claimed his actions were purely strategic, reign of terror meant to unify through fear. Either way, the forest of the impaled returned, stretching across the plains of Wallachia. The Ottomans hesitated to advance. Even hardened soldiers balked at the grotesque sight of thousands of skewered corpses. Yet power built on fear is fragile, and enemies lurked at every turn. Vlad's court became a nest of intrigue, whispers, and betrayal. Even among his own nobles, loyalty was uncertain. One by one, those who questioned his authority vanished impaled or beheaded in the night. His people feared him as much as they revered him. To some, he was a tyrant. To others, a savior who would not bow to empires. But as his rage grew, his allies began to dwindle. The balance of power in Eastern Europe was shifting, and Vlad could feel the walls closing in. The Ottomans regrouped under a new and ruthless command. Once more, they marched toward Wallachia with overwhelming numbers. Vlad, desperate to defend his homeland, called upon every remaining soldier and peasant willing to fight. He employed scorched earth tactics against burning crops, poisoning wells, and destroying bridges. His goal was simple: make Wallachia a wasteland the enemy could not survive. Yet, even his relentless strategy could not stem the tide forever. The Ottomans' numbers were vast, their supplies endless. The final battle loomed near Bucharest in 1476. Vlad led his army personally, refusing to hide behind his men. Witnesses wrote that he fought like a man possessed, charging into the thickest fighting with sword raised high. His voice carried across the field, rallying men who had already lost hope. The clash was brutal and unrelenting. Blood soaked the snow until it turned crimson beneath the horses' hooves. The air rang with screams, the clang of metal, and the whistling of arrows. Vlad cut down enemy after enemy, his armor dented, his face streaked with dirt and blood. But amidst the chaos, betrayals struck once again. A faction within his own ranks, perhaps bribed by the Ottomans, turned on him. Confusion erupted as allies and traitors clashed under the same banner. Vlad fought to the last, surrounded by enemies, closing in from all sides. Some say he was struck down by an Ottoman soldier. Others whisper it was his own men who delivered the fatal blow. When the battle ended, the ground was littered with corpses, but none inspired more awe than his. His head was severed and sent to the Sultan, impaled on a spear as grim proof of victory. The Sultan ordered it displayed before his court in Constantinople. Even in death, Vlad's face was said to wear a faint, defiant smirk. The message was clear. Fear had not broken him. His body, however, vanished. Some say it was buried in a monastery near Snagoff Lake. Others claim it was stolen and hidden by loyal monks. No one knows the true resting place of Vlad the Impaler. Over centuries, his legend transformed. From a brutal ruler, he became the seed of one of history's most enduring myths. The name Dracula came from his father's title, meaning the dragon. Vlad, the son of the dragon, thus became Dracula. Writers in later centuries, most notably, Bram Stoker, would resurrect him as a creature of the night. The historical prince became a vampire in the Western imagination. But the truth, darker and more complex than fiction, remains buried beneath centuries of fear and fascination. To Romanians, Vlad is still both hero and monster, defender and destroyer. His reign of terror may have been cruel, but it was forged in a world where mercy often meant death. He stood between two emperors, Christian and Muslim, and trusted neither. His story endures because it embodies the duality of man, savior, and sinner, ruler and tyrant. In the castles and valleys of Transylvania, his name still echoes in whispers, and when the wind howls through the Carpathian peaks, it is said that the spirit of Vlad the Impaler still watches over his blood-soaked land. His ghost, they say, walks under the moonlight, searching for vengeance against those who betrayed him. Some villagers still refuse to speak his name after dark. Tourists who wander near the ruins of Ponari Castle report strange chills and disembodied voices. A bat's shadow gliding across the walls, a flicker of movement in the corner of the eye. The line between history and horror blurs in this land of mist and myth. Centuries later, the world still cannot decide if Vlad was a monster or a necessary evil. But one thing is certain. Few rulers in history ever wielded fear as skillfully as he did. The world remembers tyrants for their cruelty, heroes for their courage, but Vlad the Impaler, somehow, for both. His story reminds us that power, once corrupted by vengeance, leaves only darkness behind. And so ends the tale of Vlad III Dracula, a man who lived as a prince, ruled as a terror, and died as a legend carved into the marrow of time itself. After his death, the legend of Vlad refused to rest. The monks who buried him said the earth trembled under his grave. Some claimed the tomb was later found empty, his body gone. Others whispered that his soul was too dark to remain buried. Years passed, but his name never faded from the tongues of peasants. The people of Wallachia spoke of a ghostly rider seen under the blood moon. A dark figure on horseback, eyes glowing red in the mist. Villagers said he still watched the forests he once ruled. Dracula never dies, they whispered, crossing themselves in fear. Fear was his true legacy, more lasting than any crown. In death, Vlad became more powerful than he ever was in life. His cruelty transformed into myth, his name into warning. Some saw him as a hero who defended his homeland. Others saw him as the devil reborn in human flesh. History could never decide which one was true. What could be certain was his mastery of terror. He ruled not with gold or armies, but with fear itself. That fear still echoes centuries later. In dusty chronicles, he is remembered as the Impaler. His enemies called him the son of the devil. But in the East, peasants called him the Protector. He had become both savior and monster. Time blurred his image, leaving only shadows. When Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in 1897, the name returned. Stoker turned the cruel prince into an immortal vampire. The novel's Count Dracula was a reflection of the real Vlad, a man cursed by blood, thirst, and vengeance. The transformation was complete. Warrior became a legend of horror. The Western world met Vlad again, now cloaked in gothic mystery. The real history hid beneath the fangs and castles of fiction. But the truth was always far darker than the myth. Vlad did not drink blood, yet rivers of it ran because of him. He did not rise from coffins, but his victims did not rise at all. His impaled fields were real, and their stench haunted nations. And still, some admired his strength. They saw in him the image of a ruler unbroken by fear. A man who gave evil a purpose to protect his homeland. That contradiction is what makes him eternal. Because evil mixed with virtue is the most terrifying kind. In Romania, Vlad is remembered differently. There he is, both tyrant and patriot. Monuments bear his face, yet children are warned by his story. He is the sword that cuts both ways. The old castles of Wallachia still whisper his name. Ponari Fortress stands ruined, but his spirit lingers there. Locals say at midnight, his shadow walks the ramparts. Horses neigh in the dark, though no riders are seen. The air turns cold, and dogs howl into the mist. Even the mountains seem to hold their breath. Historians later found his letters cold, brilliant, and merciless. They revealed a man trapped between righteousness and madness. He wrote of betrayal, of justice, and divine punishment. To Vlad, fear was order, and cruelty was discipline. He believed the world could only be ruled through terror. His empire was small, but his reputation spanned continents. The Ottomans, the Hungarians, the Saxons all spoke his name with dread. He had become what every ruler secretly desired. Unforgettable. In the centuries that followed, his myth grew stronger. Churches tried to bury it, scholars tried to explain it, but it lived on. The name Dracula became immortal. Tourists now travel to Romania to walk in his shadow. They visit Bran Castle, mistaking it for his home. They buy red wine, called the blood of the Count. The world that once feared him now profits from his legend. Yet those who look deeper see more than fantasy. They see a ruler who used darkness as his weapon. A man who became the monster to defeat monsters, and that truth is far more terrifying than any vampire tale. The forests of Transylvania are quiet now, but the silence hides stories too grim to fade. Beneath the soil lie bones that once trembled under his rule. The land remembers what history forgets. The wind still howls through the Impaler's domain. And sometimes, if you listen closely, it whispers his name. The shadow of the dragon's son stretches across time. His cruelty, his brilliance, his cursed day, all endure. Evil does not die. It transforms. It hides behind faces, thrones, and even stories. Vlad the Impaler's soul became that story. A story that fed upon fear until it became immortal. Perhaps that is why no grave could hold him. Because his legend was larger than death itself. Even now, his legacy drips into every retelling of darkness. Every vampire born in fiction is his descendant. Every tale of terror carries a shadow. Vlad wanted to be remembered, and he succeeded. But the price of immortality is that the world remembers only the monster. And yet, in every monster, There is a man who once believed he was right. That is the real curse of Vlad the Impaler. To live forever not as a king, but as fear itself.